very, very interested in looking into Kamala's America, what I call the nightmare scenarios. What will come if Harris and Walz take power? I'm talking to a lot of very smart people who have a lot to say about this question. And with me today is Jeffrey Tucker, who is founder of the Brownstone Institute. I think Jeffrey's going to have a lot to say about free speech and many other things. But first, before we do that, Jeffrey, why don't you tell me more about yourself and what you care deeply about?
Uh, I would say since college, really all I've cared about is the idea of human freedom as a rare thing in human history, but the most productive, most beautiful one, the one that's most ennobling of human life. And so I fell in love with the concept itself, and I guess I've just dedicated myself completely intellectually, and all my work, my entire career has been dedicated to that and that alone, all its iterations and its meanings and how to get from here to there. And I started Brownstone because I didn't see enough people talking about what happened to human freedom after the COVID situation, and which it was just devastated on multiple levels and uncountable ways, and a lot of legacy institutions just weren't prepared to talk about it and understand what happened. So I started Brownstone, so, to deal with that and all of its implications.
And so these are very strange times for somebody so devoted to the ideas of liberty and human freedom and flourishing because of that. So I'm going to ask the question right up front. What is it that you concern yourself most with regard to a possible Harris-Walz administration? I mean, no administration is perfect, but I think that they're going to present us with unique um, problems, continuation of problems. And what would you say the worst case scenarios are and the thing that you care or you worry most about? If worry may not be the right word, and maybe it is.
In April of 2022, the Biden administration put out a declaration on the future of the internet that was designed to replace the Declaration of Freedom on the Internet that had come out about 10, 15 years earlier. And they took out all parts of it having to do with free speech and the rights of users, the rights of producers, and so on, and replaced them with a new model that would be a stakeholder model. They want the entire internet controlled by what they call civil society, universities, government, and large corporations. And they have every ambition. And ever since then, they've been cracking down more and more. So they have every ambition to turn the whole of the internet into a version of the 1970s television. So just major corporations and nobody else allowed to speak their mind at all, really, and it would be a criminal offense and a prosecutable offense. This is the actual stated ambition on the part of the Biden administration, of which Kamala is part. And Kamala is just a symbol. She's a symbol of deep state ambitions to do this, and they're doing it right now in Australia, and they're doing it in Brazil, and those are two test cases, and they're coming for the United States. So that will be, I think, the first and most practical fact on our liberties that will happen. And after if she does take the oath of office, is that there will be uh, immediate pressure on Elon Musk at X to block a bunch of accounts and change the algorithms to make it impossible for misinformation, disinformation, which is the words that they use for meaning true information. They want them off of X, and he'll be given a few months test. And if that doesn't happen, then they'll just pull down they'll find some pretext. Even if he tries to comply, they'll find some pretext to just completely seize the domain, actually, which I think the FBI would just seize the domain and the entire service would go away. And the same will happen to Rumble, and the same thing will happen to many, many other websites progressively over the following 2 years, to the point that by the time she leaves office, the internet will not be even slightly free. It'll be entirely a stakeholder government-run system of public indoctrination, and so that I think is the going to be the most near-term impact of a Kamala victory. And we can talk about other things that they're going to follow that, but that I think is the most important initial thing.
I must applaud you for giving me, I think, the most chilling answer to that question right off the bat. We didn't even have to explore it. That is so frightening that anyone who hears what you just said and doesn't pause and then rethink and explore and do everything possible to prevent that from happening is off the rockers or part of the deep state or, supporting of this kind of
Yeah.
nightmare totalitarian government.
Yeah, I don't know how many of people who swear their fealty to Kamala and support her understand that these are the implications. A completely government-run system of media and internet. But that is exactly where we're headed. Unfortunately, you've got a lot of people out there that are so indoctrinated by mainstream media that they will support it. And here's the thing too, that this will all be supported by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the rest of the corporate press, and you say nothing of ABC, CBS, NBC, and MSNBC, and so on. They'll all support this because they're so concerned about their loss, CNN, their loss of viewership and their loss of influence that they're right now, and this has been going on for some years now, clinging to the government censorship apparatus as a means to save themselves from competition.
Yes.
So, so, so there are all these things. All these venues are declining dramatically, and viewership, which means ad revenue, and their livelihoods are being threatened. So they would love the idea of massive speech controls and control over the internet because they're really bitter about losing the competition in a fair game, a fair capitalist game, and they are losing. And so this is their one hope. This is for them to be part of censorship is their path to profitability. Now, if you'd asked me several years ago, to explain something like this, I couldn't have done it as well as I just did because I didn't really understand how censorship would benefit the biggest industrial players. I mean, I just never imagined. I mean, you normally think censorship, oh, surely the New York Times would be against that, the Washington Post would be against. No, they're all for it. They want it. They're desperate for it. They're clinging for it, and they're advocating for it. And they're cooperating with the whole censorship industrial complex to bring it about. They're furious about Google's furious about Rumble, and Facebook is livid about X, and so on it goes. And so, as a matter of industrial survival, they're going to cling to compulsion and coercion and speech controls as a way of seeing it happen. I mean, what happened during the first year or two, really, of COVID? Like initially, when the lockdowns came, all the mainstream press was saying, "Stay home, stay safe, get your groceries delivered by somebody about whom we don't care because he's too busy delivering groceries to watch our media channel. So screw that guy. The rest of you need to stay home and stay safe." So and
The
then it was
classless society became very class
yeah,
stratified during COVID,
did
did it not?
it did. And then it was put on your mask, put on your mask, put on your mask, and that's all you heard. And then it was, of course, get the shot, get the shot, get the shot. Winter of severe death and suffering, if you don't get the shot. And then it's get your booster. And so and then, the banning of candidates who opposed all this stuff from social media. I mean, Zuckerberg was taking down accounts of even Scott Jensen, who ran against Tim Walz in Minnesota. He wasn't allowed to advertise on Facebook. His
I didn't
account,
know that.
yeah, his entire Facebook account was taken down, and he only lost by 7 points. But he would have won Minnesota governor if he had been allowed to reach the masses, but he was blocked entirely. So he was, reduced to going to town, and speaking uh, to people in small cafes and things just to get the word out. I mean, and even then, I mean, he barely lost, but he would have won. And there's it's true with elected officials all over the country. A lot of people tried to campaign against lockdowns, against masking and forced vaccination, and the domestic capacity restrictions, the business closures, the school closures, and so on, but they weren't allowed to, which suggests to me that because of mainstream media and because of Facebook's speech controls, that we have a whole crop of illegitimate elected leaders in this country, where people were not given a fair look at the candidates because of all the censorship. So all this censorship that we saw will be renewed and intensified under a Kamala Harris administration. That is absolutely for sure, with the goal of institutionalizing it and forcing all companies that remain on the internet to have to force their users to sign a terms of service that will include liability for misinformation or disinformation. So you won't see anything other than Harris Waltz regime propaganda on the internet, and that will happen. That will happen so fast it'll make your head spin. That's done by summer.
Yeah. I you know, you gave I wanna narrow down, just for a moment because on a real world example, you spoke of Walz's, opponent. I had
Hmm.
never heard anything about this, or maybe I had, but there's just too much information. It's a fire hose or a Niagara
Sure,
Falls
get it.
of information that comes in now, and you just can't keep your hands on all of it. That's a real world consequence of what the censorship industrial complex will mean to us. A man who lost his race, that he invested time, money, and not only the loss to him, but the loss to the people of Minnesota and even America because it extrapolates from there. That's a real world example. And if you multiply that, because we can't even begin to understand how extraordinarily wide and deep this will go, because
Right,
the domino effect, I mean, my brain's just kind of exploding. There's going to be so many other areas and individuals and organizations and
sure.
institutions and businesses that are literally destroyed or halted in their doing business or living life
Yeah.
as they would choose to.
Yeah, and the censorship will profoundly affect our elections, which is to say we'll never again have a fair election in this country. Because if you want to run for public office and you say things that the censorship industrial complex doesn't like, then you get immediately shut down. You cannot reach your audience, and you're in effect prevented from ever reaching people who in a way that they could vote for you. So it's a way of kind of creating a one-party state in America. That's what the censorship will accomplish. Scott Jensen, by the way, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the reason he was so passionate about this issue is that he's a doctor of infectious disease. So he's a highly trained medical doctor who understood everything. He knew that the CDC was lying and knew that these lockdowns were going to make everybody sick, and that masks don't stop the spread, and that the shots don't work because there's never been an effective vaccine for coronavirus ever in human history. And he also anticipated that they were likely to be rather dangerous because it was testing on a new technology in which you deliver uh, RNA through lipid nanoparticles with an injection, okay, that travels through the blood and keeps releasing the spike protein. So he knew all this and was explaining all this. And and keep in mind that this was 2020. Okay, so he was very early on, and he was speaking to all the issues that were important to Minnesota's. Why are schools closed? How come you can't see your aging parents in the hospital? Why are elderly being forced to die alone? How come good therapeutics like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin are not being used, and so on? He was saying all these things. They shut him down, and so he lost. But it wasn't, and he was a legitimate expert, unlike say Fauci. Um, and so he lost, but how many others lost? In 2020, then 2022. This is the thing. Remember the red wave that everybody was expecting, and it didn't happen.
I
And you would think it would
suspect,
have. Yeah,
I suspect there
it's like
should have been a red
we
wave.
there should have been, and we expected it because at that time the Biden administration was holding everybody hostage for vaccines and the many schools were closed, and the Democrats had made a complete wreckage out of the country, and it was a perfect opportunity. And then the red wave just didn't happen. Well, why is that? I mean, a lot of it comes down to the exact same thing that affected Scott Jensen in Minnesota. Those people just couldn't reach the constituents with the message because of media censorship. So the censorship is still going on, but we haven't seen anything like we're going to see. I mean, after the vision of the Biden administration vision of what the internet should look like, which they clearly wrapped out in April of 2022, and there's and a document that's posted on the White House website. You will see exactly what it's going to be, which is to say, you will not have access to any information that's not approved by uh, by the administrative state. That's the bottom line.
What is that
That's where
document called again?
it's called Declaration on the Future of the Internet.
Kind of like the Declaration of Independence, Declaration of the Future of the Internet. And that was to replace a
The
document that
Declaration,
went back.
yeah, it goes back 10, 15 years called Declaration of Freedom on the Internet. The first point of which was don't censor, allow free speech. All right. So they eliminated all that. And if you look that up on the internet now, you look up Declaration of the Future of the Internet now, they have it all embossed, like it's on parchment or something like that with fancy lettering, and it's like they're this very serious. They're very serious about this. Yeah.
Is there like a John Hancock signature at the
Yeah, yeah,
bottom?
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it's so goofy, and with Chris, curly Q writing at the top. It's so dumb. But it also just so we understand how serious this is, not just on the White House website, it's also at the State Department website. And the State Department has gone fishing, all around the world to find other governments to sign it, and so it's like, if you're going to be friends with the
They're
U.S., you better sign it.
you just said
Yeah,
that they're going, the State Department,
yeah,
which is a whole subject in and of itself, but the State
yeah,
Department is fishing around the world to get other
yeah.
states to sign that document.
Yeah, and they've got many. I mean, they've got several dozen governments
How about
that signed it.
Maduro and Venezuela and
Yeah,
Xi and China? And, we
yeah,
used to think,
probably. I don't know. I have to look it up.
the problems are not communist China. That problem's permanent is there. I mean, unless there's a
Yeah,
revolution. Venezuela, that's a whole story. But when we look at what is happening in the UK right now, and so many Australia, the UK, people being imprisoned for tweeting a distasteful, according to the government, tweet, and literally
yeah,
just putting a 21-year-old boy or a 72-year-old grandmother in prison for
yeah,
years while
yeah.
machete wielding men and groomers and gang rapists are out on bail, never been arrested, or have been released after a very short period of time. But grandma
Hmm.
and your son can be put in
Right.
prison for just saying something slightly untoward according to the government.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And so they're slightly ahead of us, but the U.S. State Department is behind a lot of these things. I mean, the U.S. State Department was working very closely with Brazil. One of the interesting documents that came about after Brazil's takedown of X and Rumble, which if you're in Brazil right now, you can't look at X or Rumble unless you get on a VPN.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the interesting documents that has come out is a statement last year from the Biden administration bragging about a meeting that he had with Lula and the Lula administration about how they're working and cooperating together on cracking down on disinformation on the internet. So this was definitely part of a Biden administration
I want to
initiative, which,
I want to ask you about that.
yeah,
when I accidentally got, we don't really use YouTube because I inadvertently got us banned there. I made some short video. The next day we were demonetized and blah, 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 blah. But
Yep.
I did go and look at terms of service um, for the heck of it. And not only were you not supposed to speak about the election in any way that would call into question its perfect, probably the freest and fairest election in the history of the world, but they also included Brazil in there, which I
Yeah.
found absolutely astonishing. They didn't include any other state, but it just happened to be the United States and Brazil. And I know that the
Right.
CIA went down to Brazil. Um, I don't know, sometime between 2021 and 2022. I'm not sure when because it escapes my memory. But so what you're saying is the State Department and the CIA are very and the Biden White House proper is very involved with Lulu in suppressing the
Lula.
free
Yeah.
speech.
Yeah, very much so. And there's a reason why events in Brazil seem to parallel those of the U.S. About a year or two later. So,
Hmm.
um, one of the purposes of the lockdown period was to purge the Bolsonaro supporters in Brazil, to drive him out of office, and then get rid of Boris Johnson in the UK, drive him out of office, and then Trump in the US. So those are the three top targets of the COVID enforcement actions, was to ruin those the three most popular and prominent populist governments in the world. So once having done that, then the next step was to crack down on the people who doubted the legitimacy of those elections. So we had um, the the wild prosecution of protesters on January 6th, and
Hmm.
then the suppression of dissent. Now, if anybody raises a question about 2020 or 2022 in this country, you're immediately seen as being some sort of crazed conspiracy theorist. But in 20, I think it was 2022, when Bolsonaro was running against Lula in Brazil, they had mass protests because there was a lot of questions. There were and are a lot of profound
Legitimate
questions about
questions.
yeah, about that election. And so people took to the streets, hundreds of thousands of people. And then Lula rounded up thousands of them, many thousands of them, and threw them in jail. And
And that
just a
was
few
not
days,
covered, by the way, Jeffrey, in the
no,
establishment press or the regime
no,
press. It was covered by very few news organizations.
yeah, that's right. And my friends in Brazil, became afraid to even raise questions about the election. They will in private, but not in public. But and now this Justice Moreno, I guess his name is, forget his name, was taken down Rumble and X, and there were mass protests in the street last week. Mass protests. I mean, it's hard to put a number on it, but certainly tens of thousands, many tens of thousands. Because one thing is that the streets aren't big enough for it to hold everybody.
I
But
know I've
as
seen their
far,
pres
uh,
their crowds are really big crowds.
yeah, they're big crowds and they stretch on for miles. So it's just uncountable numbers. And then the same day that those protests were going on, it was Independence Day for Brazil. With the last time of which this was held, Bolsonaro presided, and there were mobs of people everywhere. This time, Lula had cleared all the streets so that he could have his fans cheering, and absolutely not a single soul showed up. Not one person showed up. So, and you can see this with the drones flying above. That there's empty fields for miles with nobody, and so those two things happen on the same day. So you want to tell me that this guy won a free and fair election just 2 years ago? I
Hey,
just
we've
don't.
seen it in the United States.
Yeah,
We've seen it in the
right.
United States.
Yeah, we
Um,
have. So yeah, it's there's spooky parallels. So what we're seeing in Brazil is exactly what they want to do to the U.S.
And there
It's
was a
it's going to
reason
happen.
that, oh, I'm
Guaranteed.
sorry, I keep talking over, but there's a reason that YouTube specifically identified that. And to me, it was the proximity of the events. They didn't want they didn't want that if that election was successfully either overturned or questioned in a
Yeah.
very broad scale where it became actually covered, it would be impossible for the establishment press not to cover it. That would fuel the fire of those of us who questioned the 2020 election, and that
Yeah.
could not happen. That
Yeah.
could not be allowed to happen.
No, it does make you wonder. And by the way, just so I'm clear, when 2020 happened, I just assumed that mainly because I guess I wasn't predisposed to thinking any elections are in the United States are fake or fraudulent. But yeah, but the problem is that back on March 12th, 2020, the CDC, without ever asking the Trump White House, just went public with an announcement that the election should be mainly conducted through mail-in ballots around the country, and they sent out the order to all public health agencies in the country, and that was basically what turned the election for against Trump were the mail-in ballots. Okay, so this was definitely done by an administrative agency that had a bone to pick with Trump uh, uh, because Trump had fired James Comey at the FBI, and then tasked a guy named Rod Rosenstein to do the work, who succeeded Comey as acting director of the FBI. His sister was the one who called the press conference on, I believe it was February, I may get the date slightly wrong here, but I think it was something like February 18th, 2020, to tell the New York Times and the Washington Post and everybody else that lockdowns were coming. Okay. His sister. Okay, so she told everybody, and that's when the New York Times started going, "Oh, lockdowns are coming. There's a bad bug on its way," and so on and so. And then the CDC, just 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, suddenly announces to the country that the election will go virtual and everybody should use mail-in ballots, and it was that turned the election again. So it makes me wonder. Initially when Trump was going around saying this is a fake election, I was kind of wincing, like, oh, that's kind of tacky.
I know it seems
Uh,
tacky. That's so
yeah, I mean,
funny.
I didn't like it because it reminded me of, like, bad sportsmanship. If you're a tennis player and the umpire, the referee
Stop
calls,
whining.
yeah,
Just
stop
take
whining.
it like a man.
Right. But in the meantime, I've kind of changed my view on that. And now we just want fair elections, but we don't even know if we're going to get them. We don't even know. We don't know what kind of structure is in place, and we
There's
know
no
for sure that.
mechanism to be able to see clearly through.
Yeah,
It's sort of like
no,
that iron wall that descended uh, across Europe. It's the iron wall of the central of the authorities, the administrative state, the deep state, the swamp, and the censorship industrial complex. All of these
yeah.
things um, obscure our vision. We're not allowed to see. And when I saw you mention something about your book called, by the way, the books at the Brownstone Institute, I only have one. I'm going to buy every one of them. They look brilliant. I
Thank
really
you.
recommend them. And
Yeah.
well, I won't talk about the one I'm reading right now. I was trying to look for the one that you wrote.
Oh,
Um,
life after lockdown. Life after lockdown.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. Before that, I wanted to mention something. I
Oh,
have Life After
Liberty or Lockdown.
Lockdown.
Yep.
I'm
Okay.
reading that
Good.
now.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
you have one called The Market Loves You. And you were
Yeah.
commenting on that in an interview. And you said, you know, I actually love reading this book, The Market Loves You, that you wrote, because it shows me, it's a good book, of course, but
Yeah.
it shows me how I was wrong or I didn't see certain things because it hadn't become clear to me. And I think that that is sort of demonstrative also of what you were just saying about elections, because people do
Yeah.
wince at things like bad sportsmanship or just take
Yeah.
it. You can't do anything about it. Come on, be a man. But, and also things today that are very real to many, many more people than, say, 5 or 10 years ago. What used to be these maps of interconnections of individuals and organizations and businesses and banks and whatever, that everybody used to say, these are the tinfoil hat guys, and they're crazy. Now it's sort of like the most respected people. Um, and the greatest institutions are that affirm and uphold freedom are putting these maps together and saying, wow, things are really there, this interconnectedness with institutions, NGOs. I think you called it the shallow state, the
Yep.
establishment press, and the government. So we've got the deep
Yep.
state that steps back and lets the shallow state go forward.
Right.
Eyes are opening, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, that in that model, the idea is that the deep state always wants its ambitions carried out by the shallow state, which is to say, the consumer-facing industries, whether it's your local doctor or the news media or uh, somebody that you least suspect to be an agent of the intelligence agencies, because they're able to get it done much easier. So they launder their ambitions for totalitarian control of society through the institutions that people trust. The public schools, the news media, the CBS, whatever it may be. So that's the way the system works. And what I call the middle state are the civilian agencies, which are very interesting. The Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture, they're just carrying on doing what they always do. But they're not very useful. If what you're plotting is a great reset, they're not very useful because they're just bureaucrats. In fact, one of the things that's interesting is that the Department of Homeland Security shoved through the creation of a brand new agency called CISA, or Cyber Security Information Security Agency. Yeah, that took over with the COVID lockdowns, and it's CISA that was responsible for three main things. One was dividing the workforce up to essential and non-essential. So it wasn't the Department of Labor that did that. It was CISA, which was only established in 2018. Again,
Instantly,
the
they
term,
have complete knowledge. They're omniscient and
yeah,
omnipresent.
complete knowledge. Yeah, because and they send out PDFs, faxes to every HR department, public health agency in the country about who is essential and who is unessential, which is just outrageous. And then they also were the main arm of the censorship that took place. They were embedding employees at old Twitter 1.0 and Facebook and Google and so on. And then the third thing they were responsible for was assuring the integrity of the election. So all those three
It's
things were their
always
main job.
interconnected.
It's always interconnected. Yeah,
It's
it
always
is.
interconnected, and one of the best tools they have is to make it so complex that the average Joe, my husband's
Uh,
name is Joseph, and he hates me using that term. Why am I average? But the average Joe, they can only take so much. So maybe somebody can talk about the fact that Haitian migrants practice voodoo and witchcraft, do not know how to drive, and blah blah blah. And also, they are actually slaughtering cats and geese and using them for ritualistic, worship. Yeah, so somebody can get a hold of that, and somebody else can get a hold of this, and somebody else. But people do actually have to work, raise their children, pay their bills, maybe take a walk in a park. And so there is only so much time that people have to devote to things that you and I may spend a heck of a lot more time on. And our job is to make sure that enough of this information is out there. And that's why I'm doing this series. And it hasn't launched yet, but I'm doing this series because um, I want people to see how bad it can get. A lot of people don't even know how bad COVID lockdowns really were, the
well,
transformation.
I think a lot of people think know in their hearts, but they don't like to talk about it because they're so used to being censored on the subject. But I've noticed this. I'll have guests over to dinner or meet people for lunch or whatever. But if you hang out with anybody longer than an hour, say, and then bring up the subject, then the truth starts coming out, and they start telling you terrible stories. I wouldn't mind entirely. as long as we're talking about nightmare scenarios, and that's actually not nightmare scenarios. Realistically, the scenario is what happens under Kamala administration. We really should talk about the problem of grocery rationing, which is going to hit
Mm,
us pretty hard.
I love that. Well, I don't love rationing, but I love that you're broaching that subject. Please.
So it's not complicated. She has been very repetitive and never backed off of it, claiming that she's in favor of anti-gouging. I saw one speech where she
Gauging,
called it,
gauging.
yes, she called it gauging. Right. Okay. So gauging,
So that means she never actually uttered those words before.
anti-gauging, anti-gouging. Right. Which are in effect price controls in groceries. Okay. That's definitely going to lead to so those will affect every convenience store, every farmer's market, every retail grocery store, large, small, and medium, in the country. And the burden of proof will be on the store to prove that they're not gouging. And what does gouging mean? It means just going up in price, and nobody knows what gouging means, right? It could just be price increase in general, which will mean that everybody's scared to raise prices, and that's going to cause a run on groceries and an inability to replenish those groceries, because if you can't make the profit and loss metrics work, it's going to lead to mass shortages, which is going to lead to rationing. And if we get ration, so now anybody who's listening to this say, "Oh, we'll never have grocery rationing in this country." Well, we did have grocery rationing during World War II. We did. You couldn't get coffee, you couldn't get tinfoil, chicken, meat, or anything. In fact, you couldn't get lard. That's where Crisco comes from, right? It's vegetable oil. So, in fact, that the grocery rationing in World War II permanently changed the American diet as a result. But there were every family was issued a book of coupons, and those coupons were attached to the recipient himself. Now, this is in 1942. Okay, so they didn't have computers and technology and anything like that. But even then, they were somehow able to manage this program, and they enforced it very heavily with fines of $10,000, which and or 10 years in jail for transferring your coupon to somebody else, or forging a coupon or misusing it or anything else. 10 years in jail or $10,000, which translates in today's dollars to $200,000. So this is very serious, and many people were prosecuted. They had a vast network of enforcement. It was state, local. It's just like COVID. So state, local, and then Red Guard volunteers that were always policing. There are propaganda films made about this, some starring Bob Hope and so on, about like, don't you buy any meat from a what do they call it? Meat. I think they called them meatleggers. It's just like bootleggers, but they were meatleggers, and because that was the number one thing that people wanted, and butchers couldn't sell. I'm just like, it was terrible. They had to sell at a higher price, and people were willing to pay it because they couldn't make any money, otherwise they're going to go bankrupt. So meat legging was a huge problem all over the country. So, and black markets popped up all over the place. And the only way you could get anything really in those years, coffee or meat or anything else, was through black market operations. Okay, so that was already in 1942, where we had no real technology of enforcement, but they still did prosecute people, and it's hard to tell exactly how many. But one meatlegger in Boston was prosecuted and somehow sued, and his case made it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard it and said, and upheld uh, the government's position. Okay, so that is the one Supreme Court precedent we have in the case of national price control, is the Supreme Court approved it, which gives the Kamala Harris administration cover. Now, how would it actually unfold? Well, we have now the SNAP program, which is the successor to food stamps, and millions of Americans get SNAP, and they are issued these credit cards, which are called EBTs, for electronic benefits transfer cards, that work just like credit cards, and they spend them at all the stores that accept them. Uh, and that program costs taxpayers about 120 uh, $1 billion a year, and it is administered by the Department of Agriculture, because it's basically a big subsidy to big ag and to grocery stores. Okay, so going to food rationing in this country would just simply a matter of working off the infrastructure already in place from the SNAP and DBT programs and expanding it to the general population. But in this case, they could do it not even through the issuance of plastic cards, which could, be subject to some kind of, fraud. You could, get somebody else's card and use it. No, in this case, it would just be a simple matter of putting it as an app on your phone, since everybody has cell phones. Have an app on your phone. It'll be, and they'll. It's the technology, and this will all be implemented by private partners, where you put your face in and your social security in, and then you biometric data, and that'll be connected to your food rationing, and then that's what you will use at the store to get your groceries. And now keep in mind that we will also be in the midst of a second wave of inflation because we've got the Federal Reserve on the verge of lowering interest rates again. In the 1970s, we went through three waves: first, second, and third. Each time they thought they conquered it, and so they lowered interest rates and to set off another wave, and then they thought they conquered that, lowered interest rates, and to set off a third wave, the third of which, was practically led to revolution in this country. Well, we've been through one wave, and sure enough, they're repeating the same history. They're going to lower rates again, even though they're historically low right now in real terms once adjusted for inflation. So that will set off another wave of inflation that will hit sometime at this point next year. So anti-gouging laws will go into place sometime in the summer of next year, and they won't really matter that much because the inflation will have died down enough. It'll be probably running 2% or something like that. But then the second wave of inflation will kick off because of lower rates, and already we're starting to see upticks in the money stock right now. So, but it usually takes about 12 to 18 months for the lag to finally work itself out in prices. So there's going to be enormous price pressure, and that will hit this time next year, late next year, and then that's when the rationing will go into place, and the rationing will affect, of course, all the things they hate, which is like meat and butter and eggs and that sort of thing, um, and the things that will be widely available will be the fake, uh, hamburger, fake meat, and bugs, and so on, and bread products. So
Okay.
that
We're
that
going to see
is yeah, that will
lines.
happen in the next years.
Will we see lines?
Yeah. I think it all depends on how effective the rationing is. My guess is yes. The other thing they're prepared to do, though, is designate certain grocery stores as sort of um, public goods. Like, okay, Aldi is our official government grocery store. So uh, the idea is that Aldi will get this special government contracts to
Or
distribute groceries,
Amazon? Because
or
Amazon.
or Amazon will be right there. So,
Will there be empty
and we'll
shelves?
there certainly will be. You'll never know what will be available and what won't be available. Uh, and anybody who tries to use black markets, and you will, people certainly try to do that, will be taking their lives in their hands. I mean, if they get prosecuted, and there'll be some, just like with vaccine cards, there were some high-profile prosecutions of fake vaccine cards. They'll do some high-profile prosecutions for people abusing their ration cards, and they'll be able to rely on their Red Guard, Kamala supporters, Taylor Swift, and so on, to persecute people who buy meat, at higher prices than are allowed outside the official ration cards. And
But
then that
who will
same
be excluded from this? Because let me ask you, will Taylor Swift only be allowed a certain amount of sugar and meat and whatever else? Or will Kamala and Taylor Swift and all of the Swifties and all the gang, won't they be eating just as well as they always did?
Well, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't go without her hairstyle, as you recall.
Ah, very, very good
So
point.
the elites are always find a way. The rationing will also, and the price controls will hit rent also, because she wants a national law on rents, which she says will be restricted to large corporate landowners. But why? I mean, why not just if it works for them, why not just impose it on everybody? Which means that there will be fewer amenities, and if you get your water for free or your gas for free, those will now be charged for. And if something breaks, they won't be fixed, and there'll be a capital depreciation will drastically increase in all rental properties, and there won't be any new ones. So what do you do in that case? Then that's where you have to install new public housing. You have government subsidies to private developers. And where are you going to put the houses? Well, you put them where the Camelites all want them, which is in stable, high income neighborhoods that don't that are zoned against low income housing. And so next thing you know, we have Section 8 housing going in the neighborhoods of all their political enemies, right? So I this all this sounds really
Mar-a-Lago will be the chief
yeah,
place.
that's right. We're going to get
Location,
Section 8
location,
housing.
location. First
Yeah.
Mar-a-Lago.
This all sounds sort of weirdly dystopian, but I think anybody who's listening to this, I know that sounds crazy. It is not crazy. It was 3 years ago that we had millions of people displaced in their jobs because they didn't want to get an untested injection. Okay, and we had domestic capacity restrictions, shutdown of schools and small businesses, and they canceled church on religious holidays. Okay, so anything, if that's possible, anything's
But you could
possible.
go to
We have
strip clubs and you could buy alcohol and you could, so
stay
certain,
doped up. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. They'll never
You know,
close the
we
liquor
had
stores or the pot stores. That's right.
we had an experience many, many years ago. WorldNet Daily was founded in 1997. This came to my mind when you were talking on this other interview about how I'm not going to say you were naive, but your naivete about how bad this could get. You were,
Yeah.
you know, things changed, and I think it's millions of people woke up. But back in 1997, Hillary Clinton. This is going back to free speech, but it has to do with commerce as well because they're interconnected. If you're controlling one, you're controlling the other. Um, Hillary Clinton issued this secret report. It was called the Conspiracy Stream. No, the communication stream of conspiracy commerce. We were in there because we were the founding
Uh,
father, if you will, of independent internet news. My husband's career goes way back in establishment, major metropolitan um, newspapers, and he knew that that was going away. And so when the internet suddenly appeared, then we started WorldNet Daily. But immediately we got on. Now this is before Twitter and before all of the technology that connects us and makes surveillance but freedom all the more um, within grasp. And so when we started our company, um, the reaction was massive. We could not believe people had never seen something like this. A news site that actually was reporting something that the New York Times or the Washington Post would never dream of touching. And so we grew, 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 grew. But this internet, I mean, the conspiracy stream of conspiracy commerce, that was out there. We were in there. And then during the Obama administration, oh, by the way, this is my moment of naivete. I used to say, look, the internet made news, journalism, investigative reporting into a level playing field. No more, he'd ran newspapers where you'd have these thousands of pounds rolls of, newsprint, and you had to have thousands of trucks or hundreds of trucks to deliver. And I don't know, $20 million printers. I don't know how much they cost that were housed in massive buildings. They were so big. And it's all a level playing field now. Now, no one will ever be able to censor the press.
Mm.
Okay, now you're laughing hysterically inside. You're being polite. I really believed that. I didn't
No,
know
I
there
said
was.
the same thing. I'm not laughing because I said the same thing, and I believe the same thing.
Yeah.
I didn't believe that they could ever control. I mean, the idea of the internet back in those days was that the internet was forever and was completely incapable of being controlled by the government. But boy, I tell you what, that the more we said that, the more it tempted them, and they
So it's our
figured it out.
fault.
Kind of. I don't know. I didn't know, and the way they've gone about it by itself is just a remarkable thing. The way they've, first of all, it was just enforcing of copyright, and then defamation law, and then subsidies. A major way that the government took control of Google and Amazon was by becoming a big customer. It's very simple, right? The customer's always right. Well, what happens with the government? It's your big customer. They've got contracts and billions and billions and billions, tens of billions of dollars. So that was a gradual taking over, and then they could rely on their industrial partners to favor the censorship because because the CNN doesn't like WorldNet Daily. It's
That's
pretty
right.
simple.
And it's all kind of it's a black comedy. It's very, very dark. But I have optimism. I truly have optimism. And I think that what we do is we fight the good fight until we're dead. And, hopefully it all comes together and there are enough of us on this side that are fighting for freedom of speech and for the reduction and diminishment of the big state or the deep state. But we have to keep fighting. And that's what WorldNet Daily is all about. And we've been about. But at one point, I will close out that story. Um, Under the Obama administration, they did not like us, and I believe that that's when Google first was um, hand in hand with the government on that level. Nothing happened before that, anything like it, and so Google and the Obama administration, I believe, conspired. Criminal conspiracy, I don't know, and the blackout on W&D, we used to be on the front page of Google search returns. If you searched a news report, WorldNet Daily would be right there. And then at some point, it was just gone, which, real world example, thinking about Tim Walz's opponent, um, it started taking our revenues down. We had a book publishing company, we had a store, we had all this until we were cannibalizing our entire company, trying to save it. And then when I put up, no, we published a COVID story with peer-reviewed, scientists being quoted, and they sent us out a notification, and we were finally the last leg. We were demonetized, and that was it, which was a financial crushing blow over and over and over and over and over again. So when people ask, can this really happen? We've seen so many things like this. We've seen lawfare. We've seen 2020 elections. We've seen Brazil. All of these things that we have seen, yes, it can happen. And that's what you're describing to me, that this, especially the internet,
Yeah.
declaration
Well,
of
what's
internet.
remarkable to think it's remarkable to think that just 4 years ago, search engines would accumulate results based on user experience. So if you Googled something, whether it came up and how prominent it was on the page was determined by the credibility of the information based on user experience and how many links they were coming in. They had very strict algorithms about this, so uh, you could know, and the prominence of the site, basically. So the better your site was, the higher it would rise in rankings, and so that's the way it worked. Nobody remembers this. That's how it worked. Now, Google search results are entirely determined by the lords and masters of the state apparatus. That is the one determining factor now, and so you can, if you're attacking an enemy of the regime, you can have a website that nobody's ever seen before and become the second or top third